Good afternoon, Kishan.
Good afternoon, Flores.
So today we're going to have a look at a Reddit post and a post from Amazon or Alibaba, sorry, Alibaba Cloud about local LLMs. And specifically, we're going to take a look at what it could mean for software modernization, utilizing local LLMs to do software modernization activities. So someone anonymously, obviously, posted this on Reddit, I think this morning or 2 days ago, and bragging a bit that the QN model, or however you pronounce that, the 27 billion parameter weight model outperforms Opus 5 high effort on a specific task. In this case, I think it was a coding task, fixing bugs in a real database. It was quite a popular post also. So it was like the discussion was, I think, positively many different angles and insights in the post. And we were just thinking, okay, what could this mean for utilizing local LLMs for software modernization? Like from the first, also from that angle and from your first reaction or insight that you had from this article, what do you think? Is the claim rightfully or?
It could be rightfully. It depends, of course, how this is being tested, since it says it runs in Pi, and Pi is one of the most customizable harnesses or coding CLI tools that you can have. So it totally depends on how you set it up. Claude Code, for example, is also such a harness, but it's configured by default by Anthropic. It does already what it needs to do, and it knows what it needs to know to code. But Pi is basically bare bones. You have to make your own skills. You have to make your own interpretations of what you're trying to achieve. So that means it's a bigger entry point to set up, but also that makes it very customizable to your use case. So that is one of the things that I would put as a caveat. Of course, if you say you use Pi, then you know a lot about what task is at hand and how to configure that. But I also sense that the general consensus since Fable 5 went public and public for use after they disabled it is that the latest Claude models, Opus 5 and Sonnet 5, are different than 4.8 plus, for example. That's the general consensus. I have no meaning, I don't have any substantiation of that statement, but the general consensus is that they are more verbose, sorry. They use a lot more tokens to achieve the same task, and they take more time to reach a conclusion, where in the past the feeling was that the models did better in a shorter amount of time with less token usage. So that might also be something that played on. Something changed along the lines of changing from 4.8 to 5. We know that something changed because they put a blog post out that they changed the tokenizer with this new model. But apparently the feeling is that more changed than just the tokenizer. The whole feeling of how Opus reacts and what it says back also changed. But that can mean multiple things, right? Either the model itself changed or the harness changed around, because both things work in tandem with each other to make the output more verbose. But I don't know that. What the
Could that be
culprit
a
is.
reason then for people to go also take a look at the local LLM, so to have more a saying in what you put in the harness or not, or?
Our users, of course. Yeah, people that want to customize things and know what they want and know how they want it. A tool such as Pi is brilliant for that, because you can customize it all the way. It's the difference between, let's make it very simple, Apple or Android, iOS or Android, right? One gives you all the tools and you need to use them as they want you to use them, or you have a bare bones phone and you can install whatever you want and make it your own. Some people like that, some people don't. So that's, I think, the simplest example I can give, or the simplest comparison.
Right. Okay. And in a sense, so the author states that it is only 22 gigabytes, the model. You can run
Yes.
it on a simple machine. Obviously, it would be super slow then, but we're going to talk about the hardware later. QN was already on our radar. I think we saw it pass by a couple of times already. This newer model is then more powerful and then apparently can match some tasks when you configure it properly with like the Claude models. My question would be like, you spoke a bit about like the harness and the scaffolding.
Yep.
Can you explain a bit how that works, just to have an understanding on what you need to do to make it work better for your purpose?
There's no straightforward answer for this, so it depends on what you use and what your use case is. So for us, it would be coding, right? So we would use a coding harness. It's basically the set of skills, the set of a basic set of knowledge on how coding works, what it needs to do, without you explaining what coding is, and tooling to achieve that. So for that purpose, there are open source tools that provide all this for you. I think a week ago, DeepSeek made its own tooling for it. It's DeepSeek harness for this purpose, but also for many other purposes next to coding. Then you have OpenCode, which is specifically for coding. You have something like Aider, you have Codex, you have Claude Code, you have Pi. Well, you have a whole bunch. Quen has its own harness as well. So you have a bunch of tools you can use. The most common are Codex and Claude Code, of course, because those are pushed from bigger companies. But you have a whole load of open source tools ranging from fully pre-configured, you just install it and it does the work it needs to do. You have to, of course, like it's very like going into an ecosystem and you have to work with that. Or like I said, Pi, building it from not from scratch. There is of course tooling in place, but customizing it totally to what you want it to do.
Does that mean that you load up MD files with specific insights and knowledge, or?
You can, some work like that, but Pi basically you talk to it to create a certain skill, or you write a couple lines. Pi works very differently, I think, than the other ones because you only need a couple of lines to explain what you want it to do, and it can do the task. You don't need, like we did in the past, giant MD files where you explain all the nitty-gritty stuff. It infers a lot of what you want it to do if you give it specific set of pipelines.
Specifically, I think for like a software modernization assessment. So when we do take on a new project, then we would we need to come up with a strategy for that specific application or platform. We do an assessment. If we would train a local model to do such an assessment, or train is maybe not the right word, but give it context, then we would put, for example, our own assessment framework in there, or some maybe even results from assessments. Or what do you think?
The simplest way would be to build a plugin or skill to do this. Like we have internally used right now a plugin. We built a skill to assess certain requirements documents. That basically is just typing, hey, you have a goal to use to go through these folders and assess what the requirements are using the tool that we created for you, which is I don't know slash gather requirements, and then it does it with the skill set we gave it. So that's basically how you can also create that for any other tooling. So for us, it will be, hey, start assessment on these documents or in this folder.
Then it's also maybe easy to see, and I think some of the Reddit users also pointed that out, that if you have a local model with good enough hardware, so to speak, that if you give it a very specific task with a very specific instruction and context and knowledge, that it could outperform Opus, in this case Opus 5. Do you think that the reason for the outperforming of between his local model and Opus was potentially that he has just a very specific and narrow instruction that he gave it to him with like context and that type of stuff, so therefore outperformed it?
We don't know right now. I'm looking through the post right now if there's any transcript of what he used. So I'm not sure. And also, I don't know what hardware he used here.
I think he had somewhere. Oh, here's another user that says I'm finding the same running on RTX 1490 with 200K context.
But the 4090 is enthusiast grade gear, right? It's the highest card you could get at that point in time. It's like we have the 5090 now, or 6090, I'm not sure where we are, which are the enthusiast level cards. They are very expensive. So it's not consumer grade hardware that runs these things quickly.
Yeah, at least. So that's
Not
also
yet.
why we are following it. You can buy stuff now, but it's a bit expensive. So just maybe going a bit into why local instead of cloud-based is like for modernization activities specifically, and then I think even more towards or confidential data. What would be the why for like using a local model? What would be the best why to use a local model for modernization activities?
There's a couple. The simplest one being, of course, not sharing your data with anyone except with your local environment, but also getting to some code bases might be on machines that are not tied to the network, which is a problem. And you can plug in another computer with an LLM on it that can get to that data without it being on the internet or connected to the internet. But the most important one is being in control of your data and being aware of what happens to the model. The model is local, so any data is local, any inference is local, any conclusion made is local and completely in your device. So you don't have to worry about training. You don't have to worry about telemetry, guardrails, blocking of data, etc. But also, one of the bigger things in the conversation right now is cost. This being able to run on able to run on consumer grade hardware, but let's say higher end consumer hardware is a big step into being breaking loose from the bigger providers where you need them to run these things. Right now, you can just use any machine, any laptop basically, to run an LLM. It will be slow, as you said before, but you are able to do it without a tie or any subscription or any API cost or any, maybe more important, no internet connection. Because right now, all the work we want to do is being done through APIs, but you need to be connected to a fairly fast internet connection for that. And if you are somewhere where it's spotty, or in a building where it's spotty, or where it's just not as we have here at home where we all have fiber, this is a big step, of course, because you can just install it anywhere, put a device there, and it will be able to run what you need to run.
So as I see it, it's also it is obviously perception that is part of the argument that you could want to have a local model. We don't want to share our data source code documents with an American AI company. That's probably one of the, but that is also be a perception risk, or it might be a risk that is only in our perception, as the companies that provide now the current frontier models all have these opt-out and zero attention agreements and all in there, or at least in their legal documents. And that, I think that there probably always are some sort of loopholes that they still can have telemetry data, or so there is a perception going on, but at the same time, I think there's also real risk. Definitely, if you drop documents in there, yeah, where does that go? You never. So, what is your feeling about real risk in a sense of that? Yeah, that's probably speculating. So maybe I want to refrain from the question. But do you have some thoughts on this?
It is speculation, of course. We don't know what's happening to what we ask or what we send there. But I saw a security report coming along where it was possible to continue somebody else's session using the thought process of the model. So normally what happens if a model gets a prompt and it's enabled thinking, that its thought process is encrypted and being sent with an encrypted piece of text inside of the conversation and being sent every time, so it retains that knowledge, but it's only readable by that conversation. But there was a researcher that basically copied over one part of the conversation's encrypted thinking, put it in a completely new session from a different user, and it could continue the conversation from that thinking. So that means that the encryption is not stored in your local account. So the problem with this is that not that it's necessarily the data you send is being exposed, but the thinking process about the data that you send is not fully secure. Now, this is a niche thing that, of course, only works if you have access to these complete transcripts of the whole conversation in code. But it is telling that it's not fully secure, in the sense that if you have a conversation with a model and I don't have the full output, or I don't have the full context of it, I can grab, if you have your laptop open, I can grab that conversation, grab all the different thinking parts, put them in another conversation, and basically continue as if it was you.
That's crazy. Looking a bit specifically towards assessment, the software modernization assessment and software modernization activities and development in the same line of activities that we do, I was thinking I'm asking you questions from the premise that we use LLMs to do this type of work, right? So still humans can do all the work, but I assume it makes a lot of sense to also let LLMs do some heavy lifting and analysis, and then more or less checking the work, and that will decrease the cost and the runway, or the runway of such projects. Question number one: do you expect this LLM supported software modernization to become like the standard that almost everyone will use? And then second, what would you with an LLM for type of documents and code? If you want to do the assessment, I assume that you do have a repository, but you do also put maybe documentation and transcripts and of interviews, or like you can put all kinds of data to have a broader perspective of what an application or infrastructure does, and then even put that in sort of a knowledge base, such as like an outline or anything similar, so that it can help you further along also in the modernization process. Maybe start with question one. Do you think that will be the standard of like software modernization activities that are supported by LLMs?
I think it's a very big pro that we have this, right? Because usually what we need to do is basically put our heads down and interview a lot of people, go through every code base, go through every piece of documentation, and create picture of what happened in the time to get there and why things happened a certain way. Now, the latter still will be the same. We don't know, an LLM also cannot infer why things were done a certain way. We still need to have the human conversations with the actual developers and development teams and people involved. But a lot of legwork can be done by these LLMs to create a picture from a code base or create an analysis on the repositories on how development was done by who was responsible for certain pieces, and what changes were made in a certain point in time. You can do that manually, of course, but this just helps you do it a lot faster. So I think LLM supported is not going anywhere, especially if in our lives. It makes everything a lot easier to get a good picture of what we are dealing with before we start doing actual planning and development. But also in the sense of creating a plan on these developments and how to do it and what to do with it and what the outputs are, it's a lot simpler to get. It's basically a sparring partner, right? So what we used to do is to create a plan in a room with a team and talk to each other to create a consensus of what we were trying to achieve to upgrade certain parts, or what would be the best way forward to achieve, let's say, version 1 of a modernized system. What we could do right now is do all that with the LLM. Of course, it is going to be biased into a certain part or a certain technology because it's trained on that. But if you are careful enough, you can guide it to be independent, an independent observer, or to be an independent sparring partner that helps you understand how you can achieve certain things. And what you can feed the LLM, yeah, of course, you can feed it entire code bases right now because we have a million context window through APIs.
The
We
cloud version
In the
then,
cloud,
but
yeah, in the cloud version. Locally, we're stuck with, I think, maximum 256 if you have really good hardware. 256K, sorry. But basically, what we would feed it is our thoughts, our outputs, and to create a plan in tandem with an LLM. You can also let it do everything itself by itself, but I don't really condone that. Especially in these cases, there's a million ways of doing things. There's no one way. You have to have a set of approaches and get the pros and cons, and then make a decision on whether you are either accept certain risks or are willing to do certain investments to develop parts. So there's no golden rule for these things.
I was thinking that this also, if it goes into the direction of like local again, or yeah, it makes sense that there is some purpose for the local LLMs. But if you want to use it with a team, it makes it a bit more difficult because then you need to expose it somehow again, and then right.
Yeah, it scales linearly, right? The more people you have on it, the more people ask questions more on it, the more your hardware requirements rise. If you do it one-on-one, then you can run it locally on every machine if you have enough memory and a pretty decent GPU. I think the most MacBook Pros with 64 gigs of RAM can run these models. It will be slow, but they can run it. The there's always going to be a case for cloud users. You see the shift happening from everyone went from on-premise to cloud, and now we're moving back to local because it's going to cost too much. Because that's basically the thing. We are right now being heavily subsidized into usage if you're not using the APIs. If you're using the APIs, you're paying for your tokens, which we all know scales poorly. It's you have to be efficient in your token usage to be efficient in your pricing. But most of the people that are using these things are using it through a subscription plan, and that caps, I think, at 200 a month, which is a lot different. You and I used a couple $1,000s in tokens just by doing some simple prototypes to the API. We need to do that because we don't want our data to be used in training or whatever. But if you do the same, you can use the subscription and basically use $100,000 in tokens for $200, which is insane because the cost, the benefits are insane for you to do a subscription. But that means it's heavily subsidized for the subscription.
Yeah, so for the time being, it's definite, or at least it sounds like it's not yet rewarding enough to go local for maybe for very specific use cases to do analysis of like very sensitive data or documents. But then in we just need to follow this topic. I think like it will be. I have still the feeling because Apple itself doesn't really have a super big or a super impressive AI strategy. I had the feeling or read it somewhere and then made that idea my own, is that Apple has some sort of hardware strategy here with the local LLMs and such. So I expect a lot from Apple to be a big player in this game also in the local LLMs.
Yeah, and you have to understand, we're just at the beginning. A couple of weeks ago, it wasn't possible to run anything decent. It was possible to run a model, but the model wouldn't really help you in any way. We ran it a couple of times on our environments. You could run it, but you can only run the model. but only running the model doesn't end the conversation, right? You cannot only have a chatbot open and use all your memory and not have any other application running because you need to do your work. These things are changing pretty fast, and especially with quantization, that they make the model smaller with less memory usage. That also improves a lot. Apparently, there is an 8-bit model right now that is near lossless, which means it performs as well as the bigger giant non-compressed model, which is crazy.
I think you spoke a bit about like the hardware part already, but we also looked at this document from Alibaba, and they give like specific details on how to run the latest model locally, and they show what kind of hardware you should use or what is best to use. Can you maybe summarize what they say in like your own words?
It's possible. That's basically what it is. It's if you have capable hardware, it's basically the same thing as we said before. It is completely doable if you are not using a run-of-the-mill laptop. If you have enough memory, if you have a good enough GPU, it's doable.
But I make the comparison here in it's like 1,300 for a setup versus a $6 a month subscription.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the thing, right? And then the $1,300 won't give you near as many options as the $6 a month plan, because the $6 a month plan is a lot cheaper. But that's the thing, $6 a month is heavily subsidized.
Okay, I think we can leave it at that because we have said enough words about the hardware. I'm pretty sure that will become better and better, and the local models will become a thing, definitely also useful for specific purposes of processing or working with confidential data and documents. Let me see. Yeah, I think we discussed most of the things on software modernization and local LLMs. Do you have anything other like insights or stuff that you want to mention before we close?
No, I like where we are going with this whole development of being able to run locally, especially right now with the models that are capable of doing actual tasks and it becoming more prevalent to do this locally. So I'm happy for the future. Let's put it like that.
Nice. Thank you for your time, Kishel.
Thanks, first.